Hi, everybody. First, I just want to thank you. Thank Anthony and thank Will and the whole team for putting this together. I find this to be an incredible opportunity. Sitting here in front of people who chose to get into the field of hospitality. I believe that people who make that choice are intrinsically wired to want to take care of others. And I think that that is an awesome superpower that we all possess. The desire to make people feel welcome, to make people feel special, to make people feel cared for. But I want to ask you this: who gets to benefit from your superpower? What work is required to ensure that hospitality, both the act of practicing it and the act of receiving it, is accessible to as many people as possible? And what are the environmental conditions that are promoting access to opportunity for some and actually structurally pushing down access to opportunity for others? Drive Change uses the food truck industry to support young adults who are coming home from jail and prison. We have the audacious belief that all people deserve access to opportunity and the skills and emotional support to actually capitalize on it. So why do I do what I do? I'm a native New Yorker. I actually grew up, my mom and brother are here. I actually grew up across the park on 81st in Lexington. And I went to private school my entire life. For me, the doors to opportunity were open, and I had that emotional and structural support to really take advantage. For 3 years, I taught inside of the jail complex on Rikers Island. And despite being a native New Yorker, it was the first time that I knew that New York was actually one of only 2 states to automatically treat 16-year-olds like adults in the criminal justice system. We just passed legislation to possibly raise that age. But what that meant was that for my young students, with the same hopes and aspirations for their future, and with the internal genius to truly possess it, was that when they went home from the system, they would leave with open felony convictions as opposed to juvenile adjudications. And the road ahead was paved with red lights, stop signs, and dead ends. Now, what happened to me when I was teaching on Rikers is the first step that I truly believe is necessary for fundamental, big systems change. And I think that with your superpower and possession of what it means to dive into hospitality and to strive for human connection, that together we can leverage that for big systems change. But it requires awareness. Mass incarceration is structurally racist and classist. What I did not know before teaching on Rikers Island is that it costs $247,000 per year to incarcerate a single person on Rikers. If we thought for a moment about possibly hiring someone at about $50,000 per year, that would be 5 people that we collectively in our own individual businesses could hire and help sustain. What I also didn't know is that 80% of the people who are on Rikers Island are actually not guilty of anything. The truth is that the people waiting on Rikers are pre-trial and simply cannot afford their bail. What's more is that because of those red lights, stop signs, and dead ends, the structural systems of oppression in our society that is steeped in white supremacy and structural racism actually creates a recidivism rate, the likelihood that someone will be rearrested or reincarcerated at about 70%. So for my young students, and in 3 years I had about 1,300 16, 17, and 18-year-olds, that's what the future looked like. But here's the thing, on Rikers Island, I also harnessed my philosophy around education. And I recognized, because I was in an environment that actually created conditions to dehumanize people, that we as people who have access to power and access to privilege, have the opportunity to build environments that structurally uplift people as well. There is an Albert Einstein quote that says, "Everybody's a genius, but if you judge a fish by its ability to climb trees, it'll go its whole life believing it is stupid." I think it's important that we think about what these conditions are and how they're supporting or dehumanizing the individual spirit. Now, inside of one of the most oppressive environments you could imagine, the least hospitable place that is Rikers Island, where torture and abuse is pervasive, there was one place where my young students were able to connect, were able to feel whole, and that was in a culinary arts class. Inside of that classroom, people were given trust and ownership, the ability to create something. And it was around the same time that I actually got introduced to a philosophy, a reframework of thinking about how we think about crime and punishment. Rather than responding to crime with incarceration and not thinking about the environmental conditions that maybe lead someone into those structures and systems, the practice of restorative justice looks at crime and thinks about response to crime through the lens of mediation and reconciliation, where offender and offended actually meet together and try to heal. What I recognized inside of that culinary classroom was the therapeutic practice and principles of cooking and serving. You see, when you cook something, it's therapeutic. There's process, there's aroma, there's taste, there's smell. And not only that, but then once you've cooked something, you actually have the opportunity to present that to someone else. And when someone makes a choice to eat something that another person has provided for them, they're literally ingesting something that someone else made into their own bodies. That takes trust, and that builds human connection and intimacy. What I recognized inside of this culinary arts classroom was the restorative justice power of hospitality. And so I was called to action because I was at that moment in a position to recognize that if I continued to operate as a teacher within the system, I would perpetuate that system. So these are some of the things that we have to be able to take ownership over. We have to be able to think of and have an awareness around what are the injustices that exist within the structures of society, not just mass incarceration, which is steeped in racism and classism, but how those same implicit biases even affect an industry like hospitality, which is grounded in love and connection. How do we reconcile that? How do we think about our action in that? This is a call to action because Drive Change is not just one business that's using the power of employment as a tool to support young adults who are coming home from jail and prison, but it's mobile. It gets out in the community by nature of being a food truck. And we source all of our food from local farms, recognizing that there is an intersection between food justice and social justice. So by getting out in the community, we are just a small nugget, and we require the movement and the participation of other hospitality businesses as well. When you have the opportunity to hire somebody, we need to be thinking about the environmental conditions that treat somebody like a fish or treat somebody like a monkey who can climb trees. We have to be thinking about how we possess the opportunity in building businesses to create environments where people can access their full potential. And that is a redistribution of power as well. So the first thing that we can do is recognize and be aware that the same issues that have oppressed and created mass incarceration, that hospitality is also steeped in some of that same oppression, racism, and classism. We can be aware of that. We can understand and we can sit with it. We can sit with the fact that there are more white investors in the restaurant space than any other race. We can sit with the fact that almost all of the people who presented on this stage today, including myself, are white people. We can sit with the fact that we are in a moment where we have this opportunity to rethink the framework upon which we think about human connection. Once we acknowledge that, we take action. So when you do have that opportunity to hire, you think about how your structure or your system might have some biases that limit the opportunities for people with barriers to employment. Specifically people who are coming home from the system, but people with barriers to employment for all hosts of reasons. And then how do we foster those workplaces to support the growth and development of individuals? Things like creating revenue shares for our workers. Things like allowing for real clear measurements for people to go from entry-level jobs to jobs in more management positions. It's that kind of ownership and it's that kind of progress that this movement shift requires. And I'm really excited because I actually think we're in a moment to make those changes. We talked a little bit today, I actually named this speech 0 Stars, Hospitality as Restorative Justice. And part of that was actually an homage to a review of the restaurant Local that Pete Wells and the New York Times made in January of 2017. What's interesting about this review of 0 Stars for Local is that Local is a restaurant that was designed with the ideas of restorative justice through hospitality in mind. It's chef-driven, it has access to, it fosters access to healthy food, and it's a chain restaurant in communities that generally do not have access to opportunity, employed and staffed by the people of the community itself. Now, what's interesting about that is that only 3 months later, another institution, the LA Times, named the sister restaurant in Los Angeles Best Restaurant of the Year. And I think that that juxtaposition is really interesting because it forces us to rethink frameworks that we exist in. And it also forces us to think about how we, in the positions that we sit in, can actually leverage that power and build access to opportunity for those who otherwise may not be able to have it. I'm really thrilled to be able to be here today. Drive Change is on a mission to use the food truck industry to raise awareness about injustice and build access to opportunity. We have a plan to move from just the single food truck that we own and operate here in New York City, a food truck that won the Vendy Award for Best Food Truck in 2014 and 15, to an affiliated model with other mobile food trucks and carts that are also inspired to use employment as a tool to bring restorative justice to our communities. Today, I hope that you feel called to action, and I hope you recognize the power that you possess so that we collectively can work towards the kind of society that we all want to be a part of. I really, truly thank you for having me here today, for being able to talk to you about this work, and to ask you to be a part of this community. Thank you so, so much.